Soon we will know whether Donald Trump is a convicted felon or just the criminal we all know him to be based on common sense. We have to talk about the Supreme Court. They have no ethics code, and also they apparently have no chill. Trump did something so Hitlerish that he's actually embarrassed, so that's new. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join a majority. This is Majority 54.
All right, Jason. Well, the defense rested this week in the Trump trial here in New York City. Closing arguments are set for Tuesday, which will be the day after Memorial Day. Surprisingly, Trump did not testify, which I'm obviously being sarcastic. Most people don't testify, and I always thought it was like, unless he was really like losing this case demonstrably, it made no sense for him to testify. And even then, probably doesn't make sense. And so now they're at this phase where the jury will come back on Tuesday, but in the meantime, they're arguing over jury instructions.
By the way, can you imagine what it would have been like if he had testified? I mean, I have to assume that his strategy would have just been to just shout everyone down, like that debate in 2020, because, they'd be able to get him up there and confront him about whether or not he actually had this affair. I mean, it would have been such an incredible train wreck.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as we'll get to, it seems like he is operating under the assumption that all he needs to do is get to the election without being in a jail cell or prison cell, more importantly. And so my sense is he would have perjured himself on the stand and, would have had no problem doing that.
That's a good point, because in the past, it seems he has actually been worried about the consequence. Like when he's done depositions and that kind of thing, they have been able to cage him in, and he's been able to, they've been able to score a lot of points on him. It's been damaging to him because he has not been willing to. But you're right. It is the old Trump slogan, just get to tomorrow. Informal, I believe, and speculated on by me slogan. But anyway, all right, that's a sidebar. Let's go back to what you wanted to talk about, which is where we are in the trial now.
Yeah, like, you want to explain a little bit about the concept of jury instructions and why this is important?
Yeah, so jury instructions are how the judge gives the jury the parameters on how they're going to make their decision, right? Because it's not ever so simple as guilty or not guilty, and everybody just knows what it is going in. I mean, the thing about the law is that you have the law as it is on the books, and then you have the law as it has been interpreted and made more specific over time, usually through appellate cases and that sort of thing, where it's all argued upon. And so in order to have the elements of a guilty verdict, there have to be all these little individual subcompartments of instruction given to the jury, all these little considerations. And then what's also a piece of this is what the parties are allowed to talk about in their closing arguments, because the difference between opening and closing arguments is massive. Opening arguments are where you can go out there and you can't really make arguments. In opening arguments, you go out and you say, this is what we intend to show, this is what we think you'll conclude, but you're not able to go out there because there's no evidence in the record. Closing arguments are where you're able to take the evidence that has been presented and tell the jury what you want them to think about that evidence. So you can say, you heard Michael Cohen say X, and here's what that means. You get to actually tell the jury how you want them to interpret the evidence that they have now seen. Well, that's why jury instructions are so important, because as you're making those arguments, you want to guide them directly to what the instructions say. And in a criminal case, the instructions take a lot longer, and the judge will sit there, and some members of the jury will get bored. The judge will read long instructions that say, here are the elements of this crime. If this is the case, you can find this, but you have to consider this possibility. And this will go on over and over and over again. And what it does is it allows the jury to go into deliberations with guidance as to how they can structure those deliberations.
Yeah, and I said this before, but I think that the presence of lawyers in that room is really going to make a difference here. I think they're going to take very seriously the jury instructions, and even sort of lay juries. A lot of trials that I've sort of just followed in the news, often the jury will ask for clarifications on the instructions after they go to deliberate. So it's the kind of thing that that really makes a huge difference. And Eli Hoenig, the former prosecutor, was on CNN, kind of building on what you just said, and then focusing on some particular aspects of these jury instructions.
The jury instructions are so important. They're sort of dry, but they're crucial. They're the last thing the jury will hear before they disappear into that jury room to deliberate. And we, as a criminal justice system, we do the best we can. We try to have the judge explain it in non-legal, understandable terms. Some part of the jury instruction is easy to understand. For example, it's up to you, the jury, to assess the credibility of the witnesses. Anyone can understand that. Other parts get really deep into the weeds, usually when we get into the elements of the crime. And what happened today when the parties were arguing about what the jury instruction should be and should not be absolutely blew my mind. I need to call this out. We collectively, prosecutors, are pushing the boundaries of due process here. The general back and forth in the courtroom today was the defense lawyers saying, Your Honor, please tell the jury specifically what the other crime is, right? Prosecutors have to prove falsified records for another crime. Defense lawyers were begging him. They have to know what the other crime is. And prosecutors were saying, no, let's keep it very vague and general. It's a bizarro world. I know that there is some aggressive reading of the New York statute that says, well, the jury doesn't really have to know what the other crime is. But to me, that suggests that the DA's office is hell-bent on getting the conviction now and worry about the fallout later.
I think that's a pretty damaging thing he just said there. And I think it's in keeping with some of the things that have come out of this office. Like, let me remind people that this is the office that just had the Weinstein conviction overturned because of overzealous prosecution. Like these are like T-ball case. You know, the Weinstein case was a T-ball case pretty much, right? Like obviously there were a lot of issues with statute of limitations, et cetera. But he's the least sympathetic defendant you could imagine. And instead of just going with the harder case and risking a potential not guilty verdict, they got away with everything they possibly could at trial and then compromised the entire case. And based on some of the things I'm reading, I'm a little worried about these prosecutors. And I think this, Eli's, what he's saying is true. Prosecutors, I think, more often than not, is that they just try to get away with what they can get away with. Like they're very aggressive. And I think this is not the kind of case to do that kind of stuff. We do not want to give Trump any reason to appeal this. And, pick the statute. Like they know what the statute is that they think he violated. They should mention what it is. And I imagine the judge actually will, because the judge is going to want to protect this case from appeal. So I imagine the judge is going to include what laws he would be violating. I just think it's like you take Trump out of the equation and you say what makes sense here, and that's common sense.
And that's actually what I think makes these jury instructions and this case so especially complicated, right? Is that it's not just a matter of were these records falsified, were they fraudulent? I mean, in fact, the defense is arguing for a jury instruction that says that just because a record is fraudulent doesn't automatically make it illegal. And I think where the judge came down was that, well, I will allow you to make that argument in closing. I'm not going to put that instruction. So that's the thing, is the instructions are not just here's what counts as guilty. The instructions are also here's what can count as not guilty as well. Here are the factors that you could consider. So, for instance, with regard to there's a big argument over whether or not the jury can consider whether or not these payments were for the purpose of advancing the campaign, or whether they were for the purpose of just, whether they were payments he might make himself anyway, right? And so the defense is saying that they want the jury to be instructed that it is that they can consider whether or not a payment was made for a reason other than the campaign, whether it was just, because it was embarrassing and that kind of thing. And then the prosecution is saying, well, the jury needs to be instructed that if at all it was a campaign consideration, then that can be enough. And it sounds like where the judge is leaning is toward just giving both instructions, just saying, hey, it doesn't have to be that just because you find that he did this thing, that means that it was for the campaign. But the judge is also probably going to instruct them, but if you decide that it was a little bit because of the campaign, you can also decide that that's enough to count as violating the law. So it's very nuanced. And Well, we from the outside, and I've been guilty of this, look at it and say, okay, it's a jury in New York City. We know it appears very clear that he is lying about denying the affair with Stormy Daniels, and that really undermines his credibility. But it's important to remember that the trial's not really about that. The jury could decide he is lying in denying this. He is lying in all these different ways, and yet we don't feel that it rises to the level of a guilty verdict, given what the law is as instructed by the judge.
Yeah, what you just said earlier is really important. I spoke to a law professor about this 2 weeks ago, where her reading of New York law was that you just need to find that it was some kind of consideration, the campaign stuff. He could be worried about his wife, and he could be worried about the campaign. In a world where he's worried about both, it rises to the level. And again, what we mean by rise to the level is that in New York, it's a misdemeanor to do the kind of business fraud that he's alleged to at base. It becomes a felony when it's in service of another crime. And in this case, it would be the election fraud crime, which is what makes this a difficult case in many ways, which opens up the possibility for mixed verdicts for people when you're starting to, game out what's possible here. One option is there's a unanimous not guilty. I think that's nearly impossible based on the fact that it's a New York jury. Yeah. I think there's a unanimous guilty on all counts, right? Which is possible for sure. And then there's this in-between world, hung jury, right? They can't agree on any of the charges. I actually think that's fairly unlikely. I think that the two likeliest possibilities are either unanimous on guilty or mixed. And mixed could be guilty on a bunch, and then not guilty on a bunch of others, and the bunch of others could be all the felony counts, right? So this could wind up being a big nothing in the end at the verdict. Or it could be they've reached agreement on guilty on a certain number of them, and they're hung on some other charges, which I think is very, very possible.
I think at this point, that's got to be the goal of the defense.
For sure.
Is to hang the jury on as much as they possibly can. Because, again, remember, we're playing based on a clock here. And so, look, if he is found not guilty, or if the jury hangs on anything, we know what he's going to say. He's going to go out and say he was exonerated.
Yes.
It could be one count, and he's going to go out and say he's exonerated. So that's what they're going for, because chances are that that's not the chances that he is retried between now and November. I don't know. Do you have any sense? I suppose it's possible.
I just think that would look particularly bad.
Yeah.
I think like at that point, rushing a retrial, they would start trotting out the stats on this kind of case has never been brought before. Not only that, now they want to retry them. How often do they retry people? How often do they retry people that fast? I think it will give the Trump team a lot to work with.
Particularly if they're only hung on certain parts of it. If they arrive at a guilty or not guilty verdict on a lot of others, and then you say we want to go back and try, then it really does start to look like more than your standard case, and that it's not being treated that way. And so I think to them, the jury hanging on anything is a victory for the defense.
Yeah, and none of us are in that courtroom, and the closing arguments haven't even happened yet. Nor have the jury instructions been released, as we just mentioned. So, I think predictions are a little premature here, but I am getting more and more warm to the idea that this is going to be a mixed verdict. And I don't mean warm like I'm inviting it. It just seems like a very plausible scenario, given that there are lawyers in that room. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's entirely plausible. Yeah.
All right. Well, fun story, Jason. I think we've been pretty hard on Alito on this podcast. I always forget which podcast I talk about things on, but it's, I think as we always bring up the Supreme Court, we have a particular fixation on Alito because I think there's so much attention to Clarence Thomas for good reason. But Alito, to me, over the years, has been the most blatantly partisan person on this court. And I think we learned some things this past week about exactly how partisan he is. So on Thursday, the New York Times reported that an American flag was hanging upside down outside of Alito's home for several days right after Trump lost the 2020 election. It was there on January 17th, 2021, which is obviously shortly after the insurrection at the Capitol.
But not that shortly. Let's just be clear. Like we're talking almost 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So That's a long time for him to supposedly not notice that there was an inverted flag on the flagpole out in front of his house. Because I have to say, like, when you have a flagpole, there's one thing, like a lot of us have like a little thing on the outside of our door, a little spot where you could stick a flag. They have from the picture, they have a flagpole. When you have a flagpole, how you fly the flag is something, I don't know. I think you emphasize that, this is not just grass growing. This is a garden. I mean, there's a difference.
I'll give you an example. I was thinking about this. What would happen if my mom flew a flag upside down on our block in Staten Island? I think the house would be firebombed. But my mom, of course, wouldn't do that. She always flies. We have a flagpole. She flies the American flag. She'll add the Buffalo Bills flag if it's football season. She'll add various like Halloween, whatever. It's a very, I guess what I'm saying is she puts thought into what was on that
forethought.
flag. And people notice, right? And I'll tell you right now, every time I walk into that house, I notice what the flag is.
Mm-hmm.
If it were upside down, I would ask my mom if she's okay.
Right.
What is your understanding? Did you have an understanding of what an upside down flag meant before this? Because you're in the military, I imagine you might.
It's a distress signal.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I've ever known it to be, is that flying the flag upside down is a distress signal, and it's like a cry for help, basically, and it's supposed to be national cry for help. It is not the same as, but it is, when done as a manner of protest, and not as a matter of like I think originally it was literally a distress signal, like, we're going to fly the flag upside down as a signal to outsiders that we need help. But when done in the manner of protest, I view it as a cousin to burning the flag.
And so Alito was, given an opportunity to comment. He gave a comment to the New York Times in which he blamed his wife for it and said that they were in some kind of dispute with their neighbors. And then he went on Fox News, as any impartial justice would do. The question now becomes, what do we make of this? Because this symbol apparently was, I didn't know this, but apparently was a symbol of the Stop the Steal rally. And apparently, like, if you sort of swim in the conservative circles, it's very obvious that it is. And so the question became, well, is that what they were trying to say? And if they were, what meaning should we make of this? Because Alito's saying it was his wife. It is his house. He must have presumably gone past it on many days. What do you make of this?
Well, let's back away for a moment from the Stop the Steal thing. Like, let's deal with that first, I guess, actually. If it is an argument, it's simpatico with the idea that the election has been stolen. Well, that is a huge deal, given the fact that this justice will preside over anything that comes to the Supreme Court having to do with the validity of the next election, which I think we know that if Trump loses, that is going to be presented one way or another to the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's a huge deal. But let's step back even from that for a minute. Let's say that it had nothing to do with Stop the Steal. Let's say that Justice Alito's spouse is trying to make some other point. There's a pretty limited number of possible points that she could have been making, and they all.
She must have been protesting the Vietnam War, is what I was
right. It's there's not a lot, right? And I think you agree with this. I am not a person who's like flying the flag inverted or burning the flag is always. I mean, no matter how I feel about it, I'm absolutely a person who believes that it should be legal, and I believe in the First Amendment and all of those things. But I do also believe that protest is made to mean something. And we're talking about, the picture was taken January 17th, 3 days before the inauguration of Joe Biden. So let's put January 6th aside for a minute. Let's put the insurrection aside for a minute. Let's put the arguments about whether the election was stolen aside for a minute. And now let's just deal with the idea that a distress signal inverted flag, a cousin to a flag burning, was put up at a Supreme Court justice's home 3 days before the inauguration of a new president, which happened as a result of the defeat of a sitting president. That is obviously a partisan statement. It is obviously a political statement at the home of a justice of the United States Supreme Court. That in and of itself, that may just be enough to be plenty concerning and to be something that clearly would violate the oath the justice has taken in the first place.
Yeah, it violates the oath. It violates the ethics rules governing the court, which say that you can't have like, political statements like bumper stickers, etc. Right? And these are toothless regulations, as we've mentioned before, or rules, because they have self-policing. And I honestly think this is on John Roberts. Like, I think like for him, it's like he's got to get control of this court, and I know that there's like a limited amount that he can do.
Yeah,
but
that's the problem. What can he do?
well, he should make a statement, as
Yeah.
we'll get to. Like I've been covering this thing in India, and during a critical period of time, 3 justices of the Supreme Court gave a press conference to say, I think there's improper things happening at this press conference, at the court. And that was the first time in Indian history it ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at this point, I understand why the liberal justices don't do it on their own, because I think it's a step that I think it's not as powerful if you can't, unless you get a bipartisan group to step forward. So I imagine that's what they're holding out for.
But don't you think that they should? I mean, look, obviously Justice Roberts should, but at this point, somebody has to show some degree of moral leadership at the court. And we should never underestimate the dynamic that is how things feel at a workplace, right? Like at the end of the day, these are 9 people who work together and have to sit together. And I imagine that if, for instance, Sotomayor were to put out a statement about the inversion of a flag, to put out a statement about, because I don't think that they've spoken publicly about Justice Thomas. Am I wrong? I mean,
which is in some ways worse, because it's a clear conflict of interest with his wife.
Right. And so I understand that, like, you have these different considerations, right? Which is like the disagreements that we have on this court happen either through opinions, dissenting or concurring or majority, or they happen behind closed doors in session with the justices. But at the same time, there's that. And then there's also just the element of we have to work with them. These are our colleagues and we only have 8, I get all of that, but these are not normal times. And if Justice Roberts is not going to lead, then someone has to nudge Justice Roberts to lead, or to lead Justice Roberts to where he needs to go.
Yeah, if I were them, what I would do is, if I'm like, probably Kagan, like whoever's the most senior. I can't remember who was first, Kagan or Sotomayor, but like I think Kagan was confirmed first. So if you're Kagan, what I would do is I would try to get the liberal justices on board. Then I would go to Roberts and I would say, look, we're going to do this on our own if you don't come with us. And if you don't come with us, it looks even worse. And your name will come out of our mouths as well, saying that we lack, any faith in your leadership. I would also go to Breyer, Souder, if he's still alive, right? Who of those guys is still alive? Souder or Stevens?
Remember.
One of those 2 guys is still alive. And I would try to get one of them, like I think Souder was appointed by a Republican. And I would do a press conference and it would be news. It would say for the first time ever. And because here's what's going on. One side, they're political operatives and they're acting like it. And we could either unilaterally disarm and say, all right, we're going to be above the fray and let them get away with it in an election, by the way, where the stakes couldn't be higher. They're very likely to see 2 retirements, Thomas and potentially Alito would retire under Republican president and Senate, and especially given what we know about how partisan they are, right? That would basically lock in a Supreme Court majority for the rest of our lives, for the Republicans.
Okay, I'll play devil's advocate for a moment about the liberal justices and what they're thinking. The other possibility is perhaps they're feeling like, look, there are issues upon which we can sometimes prevail upon and convince our fellow justices, the conservative justices. And it's possible that what they're thinking is that if we take this outside of schools, so to speak, that we lose any moral authority with those individuals and they become more entrenched, and that's not good for the country either. So I do think from the outside, it seems very simple, but internally it could be much more complicated. And I can see how that could be the case.
Yeah, I mean, what we need to see is a distress signal from them, you
Right.
know. And I think and I know that this is like, look, one side this has always been true of the court. Like the degree to which one side knows that they're uh, they're in a political struggle, and we've always been reluctant to get on board, and they always ratchet it up, and then we eventually get there, but we get there too late. This is everything in this
Mhm.
election coming up. So I know this is not how they're supposed to think, but the people on the opposite side are thinking this way, and they will be in a permanent minority on the court if we lose this election.
Mhm.
So do I expect them to get up and put a Biden for president sign? No. But if I were them, would I want the voters to take notice of the impropriety that's happening here and escalate this fight ahead of this election? Yes, I would. And I think it's a matter for the court. And I understand full well what that means. I am on board with any change to this court. Make it smaller, make it bigger, give term limits, move them to a different city, televise it. I don't know, but there needs to be change. There needs to be change on this court.
I think when people think about how to talk about this, we got to go back to something we've talked about in the past, which is that one of the uh, avenues of persuasion that is open to the Biden campaign and to all of us as we go into November is that we don't, and you've talked about this a lot, we don't always have to act like the party in power. Because for one thing, like in the House, we're not, on the Supreme Court, we're not. And there is an element of opportunity politically for the Biden campaign to make sure that people understand that there are major parts of our government where we're not in power, and to run more like a challenger and less like an incumbent. And this is the kind of thing that certainly lends itself to it. So for those listening, when you are talking to people and trying to persuade them as to why they should either be, like, if they're progressive, enthusiastic and get out there and vote, or if they're more on the fence and you're trying to persuade them to come to our side, it's about the idea that, look, we are up against real extremism that has control of major parts of our government right now. And this is a good example of that. The fact that there's no ethics code, that things are running rampant there, and that it's all happening on the conservative side of the Supreme Court.
Well, before we go to ad break, I want to share some piece of good news, which is Barack Obama just tweeted out that Joe Biden has confirmed his 200th judge. This is why elections matter, everybody. So at least we've got that. I wish more of these were Supreme Court justices, but this is a big deal.
Huge deal. Because a whole lot of people were appointed by Trump. I mean, look at, if you want examples, you can look just at the trial level of Cannon down in Florida, who's basically kicked the can down the road on that Trump case. So it makes an enormous difference, and to undo some of that damage is important, and to even make some progress. And the thing is, I think people underestimate the difference that good judges can make, not just in what the law turns out to be, but actually at the trial level in what happens in individual people's lives. There's a federal judge here in Kansas City, a really good friend of ours named Steve Boo, and people should look him up. This is a guy who, everybody he's ever sentenced to prison, he has gone to visit them in prison. And then when they come out, he gets very involved in finding them opportunities professionally. I mean, that makes a community better when you have somebody like that.
Well, okay, we're going to go to break. But before we do, I just want to mention that trailer is out for this podcast I've been working on for the past year. I'm going to play it for you guys in a second. And you can go subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It's called Killing Justice. It's a partnership I had with Crooked Media. And I was going back and forth to India to investigate this murder over the past year, or alleged murder. And on Monday, the first 2 episodes will drop, and you'll be able to access those if you subscribe. So if you like what you hear, go and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So let's go to that trailer. My name is Ravi Gupta. I'm Indian American. Emphasis on American. I was raised by my Polish mom in Staten Island, don't speak any Indian languages, and I've eaten less Indian food than most white people. For most of my life, understanding the country my family came from was low on my to-do list. That is, until I began following a mystery.
This looks like a Bollywood script.
I haven't heard a crystal clear theory as to what happened that night. The story centered around the suspicious death of a high-level judge in India.
There were some very intense questions that Judge Loya's death left behind.
There was no investigation.
There's a possibility of poisoning and there's trauma applied to this person's head.
Was Judge Loya not a part of the judiciary? Was Judge Loya not a part of the system?
Judge was set to rule in a major case that involved some of India's most powerful political figures.
It's possible that he was under pressure. Nobody denies that.
You can imagine, right, that it's never happened before in India that the Home Minister of a state has been investigated by the CBI at the direction of the Supreme Court of India, right?
When I finally went to India myself to try to understand what had happened, I found a lot more questions than answers. I was just getting a very hostile vibe from the get-go. There was like a gaggle of men in front who were asking me a lot of questions about what I was after.
He would not answer questions.
Yeah.
He would just not answer questions.
I was drawn into the story for the mystery and the political intrigue. But as I've followed the twists and turns over the past year, I've realized this is about more than just one judge's death. It's about the future of Indian democracy.
This clash, the clash between two ideas, two concepts of India.
Falsehood has become the hallmark of this government.
There is impunity. There's terrific impunity in India. Journalists are killed.
If this is not going to stop, 100 more people will die.
In this new series, I'll ask, is the world's largest democracy even a democracy anymore?
If they're willing to kill all these powerful people, this is like a very crass thing to ask, but how are you still alive?
I don't know.
From Crooked Media and The Branch, this is Killing Justice, coming May 27th. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
This is really cool. I've been watching as you've been putting this together for the last couple of years, and so I'm really excited to listen to it. I'm excited for Monday. I hope everybody goes and subscribes. So congratulations on it.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, when we come back, we are going to talk about Trump saying, doing some particularly Hitlerish things that might even be too on the nose even for Trump. And we'll talk about on the very other end of things, what President Biden had to say at Morehouse, but we'll get all that when we come back.
Life insurance is an important safety net for your family, but trying to find the right policy on your own can be time-consuming and overwhelming. I've been through this before. I don't know how to make heads or tails of the policies, but that's why I love Policy Genius. It's the country's leading online marketplace. It saves you time and money, importantly, so you can provide for your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk through it with you. Talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step. You can easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Your work-life insurance policy may not offer protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. And so Policy Genius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert and a support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you could trust their guidance. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers have found, from people who've really found that this meets their needs. So check life insurance off your list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/majority or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. It's policygenius.com/majority. As you know, I do a lot. I'm a podcaster. I'm a co-founder of a media company. I just started a company. Doing a lot, probably too much, but living a more heart-healthy life fuels everything I do. And we're introducing 3-in-1 blood pressure support plus CoQ10 from Super Beets Heart Chews Advanced. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the grapeseed extract in Super Beets is clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. New Super Beets Heart Chews Advanced supports healthy CoQ10 levels, an important nutrient for heart health. Super Beets Heart Chews are incredibly delicious and so much better than any alternative supplements out there. I take these things throughout the day. I have them sitting on my counter, and I take them instead of candy, and they taste delicious. After taking my Super Beats Heart Chews, I just feel like I have more energy throughout the day. And CoQ10 generates 95% of cellular energy your heart needs, but it can decline with age, stress, and statin use. Super Beats Heart Chews Advanced is effective and contains clinically researched ingredients from Super Beats, the #1 doctor, pharmacist, and cardiologist recommended beet brand for cardiovascular health support. Find out how you can get a free 30-day supply on bundles with new Super Beats Heart Chews Advanced and save 15% for a limited time only by going to superbeatsradio.com, promo code majority. That's Superbeats, BEETS, radio.com, promo code majority.
All right, Jason. Well, Trump on Monday posted a video showing images of a fake newspaper article that referenced a unified Reich if he's elected in 2024. The video detailed what happens after Donald Trump wins, with a narrator reading hypothetical headlines like "economy booms, borders closed." It was like a sort of old school newspaper vibe. Under one of those headlines, "What's next for America?" is a reference to the creation of a unified Reich. Another headline in the video states 15 million illegals deported. This Trump's team claimed that this was kind of errantly included by some staffer. I don't know what to make of all this. It's like seems like a long line in a pattern of behavior.
Well, first thing I think is notable is I don't recall another time when Trump or the Trump campaign has said this should not have been posted, or has, and maybe I'm forgetting something, but I can't recall another time where they have indicated that someone other than Trump is posting on Trump's social media. So that's interesting to me, because that means one of two things. Either they've made some sort of decision to change the way they do things and to not only have Trump doing this himself and not have him approving everything, or it could also just mean that this was so bad and so on the nose that they went, whoa, we really cannot take credit for this, and that they convinced him that you've got to say that this wasn't you. And I don't know which it is.
Yeah, Dan Pfeiffer had an interesting piece in his newsletter, I think it was today or yesterday, about this. And, he was kind of making a point that we've made on this podcast before, which is this going to be the thing that convinces anybody of anything? No. But right now, you just want to keep him on the defensive, keep him scattered, keep his people explaining things. And that has always been my theory on these kinds of things, right? Like, it's not this that's going to break through, especially when they disavow it so quickly. But I think the idea that you just press, make them have to explain things, make them have a bad day, it's sort of death by 1,000 cuts type of approach that I think is going to be key throughout this summer.
But in a somewhat related thing, just as a step back and think about the world we're living in moment, sometimes when I prepare for the show, I involve my son, True, in it. And school's out here, so True's home this morning. And we were sitting there, and I was like, hey, you can look at some of these videos with me. You can look at some of the notes. I'd be curious what you think. And so we sit, and True's 10 years old, for those that don't know, and we sit there and talk about it. And so we get to this one, and I'm going through and I'm explaining to him, and I'm saying, hey, I'm having to explain what the Reich reference means and that kind of thing, and how the similarity to Hitler and to the Nazis. And, True doesn't have a huge command by any means of world history, but he knows enough, and he knows he's Jewish. And so then my kid looks at me and he's like, so if Trump wins, are they going to try to kill us? And I, of course, was like, no, because I don't want my son scared. And I also don't think that the government's going to try to come kill all the Jews if Trump wins. But I also, in my back of my mind, was thinking, but if some people decide that they want to go do that, I don't have a lot of faith in the Trump government to like aggressively pursue them either. So I, and not just Jews, like anybody that they view as not adequately loyal to Trumpism. But I, of course, didn't say that to my kid, but I just wanted to say that out loud, to say that sometimes we have to step back and really underline for ourselves the real stakes in the election. And I'm not suggesting that we'll have a Holocaust of Jews in the United States if Trump is elected, but I am saying that there are real stakes in that political, cultural, ethnic violence with Trump in charge is not going to be policed in the same way and is not going to be discouraged in the same way. And that's just kind of stark.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent Monday on Staten Island researching for this this immigration series I'm working on that I'm going to put out later in the summer. And it was so interesting. I'd be talking to somebody about this like migrant crisis in New York City and how it's affecting Staten Island. And it's incredible to me how nationalized the rhetoric is. Everybody and the mythology. There's people who would just say to me, the border was closed under Trump. I had a guy say to me, and Trump built the wall, he said to me, and it's just wild to think about. And like that, like there's not a lot of local politics anymore. Like what was it? Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. It's obviously inverted now. It says even the local is national.
And look, I don't know if you followed like these AI videos that have been put out, like the Kyrie Irving video and others. They're so convincing that this is only going to get 100 times worse, because you've got people believing things that aren't true, believing things happened that didn't happen. Now imagine how much worse that's going to be when it's impossible to distinguish between actual video footage of things and made up AI generated video footage of things, like video footage AI of a wall that's not there, video footage, so video footage AI of Biden saying Trump built a wall across the entire southern border and I'm going to rip it down. That very much looks like Biden saying it. Like, this is only going to get more difficult.
Yeah. What's crazy? I wouldn't even know, let's say my ethics allowed me to, and they don't, but like would somehow excuse for me making up fake videos and putting them on the internet about Trump. I don't know what I would put out that he hasn't already said about himself, and his own people have said about him, and it's a real advantage for them. It's just that his people are immune. And not only is his people immune, it seems like a lot of persuadables are immune to anything he says.
It's so bad that, like, if I had to come up with something, and I wouldn't do this either, but if you were going to, you'd have to go so far. The only thing that would work is you'd have to make like an AI generated video of Trump being like, I'm dropping out of the race and I'm endorsing Joe Biden. Like, I mean, because obviously that wouldn't work either, but like, there's nothing you could have him say that would be damaging to him. You would just have to alter the reality and have people believe, I guess, that he's no longer a candidate, so there's no reason to go vote. I mean, it is staggering.
Well, we're going to take one more break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some positive news for Biden that the media does not want you to know. I don't know. That's more conspiratorial than I intended. But when we come back, we'll check in with the president.
Real talk, sleep is so important in my household, which is why I'm in love with my Helix mattress. With everything going on in life, from work to a demanding social schedule, which is to say I have children, to sports, both mine and theirs, it's incredibly important to me that I'm getting a good night of sleep every night. My wife can attest. We've had our Helix mattress for over 2 years now. Our sleep quality has improved tremendously. The Helix lineup offers 20 unique mattresses, including the award-winning Luxe collection. I have a Luxe mattress, the newly released Helix Elite collection. I want to find out more about that. They also have a mattress designed for big and tall sleepers, and even a mattress that's made just for kids. My son sleeps on one of those and loves it. So how will you know which Helix mattress works best for you and your body? Take the Helix Sleep Quiz and find your perfect mattress in under 2 minutes. And your personalized mattress is shipped straight to your door free of charge. I took the Helix Sleep Quiz and I was matched with a Midnight Luxe mattress because I sleep on my side and I like something kind of firm. Midnight Luxe, it's an upgrade by far from the mattress that I had a couple of years ago. Makes a huge difference on my back. I have back issues. That's why a mattress matters so much to me. Helix knows there's no better way to test out a new mattress than by sleeping on it in your own home, which makes sense because if you do it in the store, I assume that's a little awkward. But that's why they offer a 100-night trial and a 10 to 15-year warranty to try out your new Helix mattress. Helix has also been awarded the #1 mattress picked by GQ and Wired magazine. It's even recommended by multiple leading chiropractors and doctors of sleep medicine as a go-to solution for improving your sleep. Helix is offering up to 30% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/majority. That's helixsleep.com/majority. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now.
These days, a lot of people are learning about all the benefits of fasting, like weight loss, mental and physical performance, and gut health. But what about the whole not eating part? Well, that's exactly why Prolon was created. Introducing Prolon, a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. Researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute and backed by leading U.S. medical centers, Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar and support cardiovascular health and reduce abdominal fat. But Prolon isn't a diet. Prolon is a science based on Nobel Prize-winning discoveries in medicine. And this all starts with Prolon's 5-day program. Snacks, soups, and beverages, all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It's unlike anything you've experienced before. I did the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. Prolon really isn't like any other diet I've tried because it's not a diet. It truly is science. It was so convenient, and the best part, they sent me everything I needed all in one box. And it's no wonder thousands of doctors now recommend Prolon to support healthy blood sugar and cardiovascular health. Right now, Prolon is offering Majority 54 listeners 15% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/majority54. That's PROLON life.com/majority54 for the special offer. That's prolonlife.com/majority54.
All right. There's a great article in The Nation, which is not something I read very often, but it said, Joe Biden gave a great speech at Morehouse, and that's why the media didn't talk about it or something, which there is something to be said of, like, if Biden really stumbled at Morehouse, I feel like there would be a ton of
you hear
coverage.
about it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and even what looked like I watched the whole speech, like what seemed like a relatively positive speech was framed in a negative way, because like there were some things to point out for sure. Like the students seemed to have more of a lukewarm response, and the alumni seemed to be very into it. But by and large, I think this was a really positive speech. Let's go to a clip.
But let's be clear. What happens to you and your family when old ghosts in new garments seize power? Extremists come for the freedoms you thought belonged to you and everyone. Today in Georgia, they won't allow water to be available to you while you wait in line to vote in an election. What in the hell is that all about? Well, I'm serious. Think about it. And then the constant attacks on black election workers who count your vote. Insurrectionists who storm the Capitol with Confederate flags are called patriots by some. Not in my house. Black police officers, black veterans protecting the Capitol were called another word, as you'll recall. They also say out loud, these other groups, immigrants poison the blood of our country. Like the Grand Wizard and fascists said in the past. But you know and I know, we all bleed the same color. In America, we're all created equal. Extremists close the doors of opportunity, strike down affirmative action, attack the values of diversity, equality, and inclusion. I never thought when I was graduating in 1968, as your honoree just was, we talked about, I never thought I'd be in a president at a time when there's a national effort to ban books, not to write history, but to erase history. They don't see you in the future of America, but they're wrong. To me, we make history, not erase it. We know black history is American history. Many of you graduates don't know me, but check my record. You know what I'm saying. I mean from my gut.
Well, it's a very good speech. Again, as I said, I prepared for today's episode with True. And as we were going through the stuff about the inverted flag earlier, and I was offering him sort of, well, here's their explanation of it, and here's why they say it should be okay. True said, we try and keep this podcast family friendly, but he's 10, so whatever. True said, well, that's bullshit. And then when we got to this part, I played this part, and True goes, well, that all makes sense. I agree with him. Now, True is biased because he knows his parents are Democrats and because he's met Joe Biden, but still, I don't know, to a 10-year-old, he was like, yeah, that makes sense. So pretty good speech.
You know, the one thing we could say is that there's ground to be made up in the numbers here. Like, you know, there's certain elections where you get there and you're like, there are no more persuadables left. I don't know how we're going to get to the numbers. And right now, Biden is significantly underperforming with Black voters in polls, both in terms of his support amongst Black voters, but also the self-described intent to turn out among Black voters. And obviously, we've talked about other constituencies like young voters where he has this issue. So over the next few months, he's got a pretty sizable task, which is to convince people that Democrats tend to take for granted, which obviously is part of the problem. And also to win persuadables. And sometimes those things are in tension. In the case of this speech, by and large, it's not. I think there are certain cases where you have to decide both what you think is right and also who you're willing to lose or win. I think Gaza, Israel is one of those examples where, look, like there are going to be some people who are going to be really mad at you no matter what you do. And there isn't like low-hanging fruit. It's not easy, right? And it's the cost of being president. You know, you have to take a position. But I think when I think about all of this, and I think about our, you know, the Democratic side, you've got to think that people are smart enough as we head towards this election to know that this is a choice. And every issue you look at, whether it's the right to choose, whether it's issues about policing, whether it's issues about education, whether it's even Israel-Palestine issues, right? Like, no matter what you believe, unless you're an extremist, Biden is demonstrably better on these issues for the people who say they're not going to turn out, right? Like if we just go down the list on the issues they care about, climate change, student loans, you know, policing, Gaza, Biden's just better like on those issues than Trump by a long shot. Like a great example is like the Gaza stuff, right? Where Biden in that speech endorsed something like a ceasefire, essentially, right? Now, what's Trump's position? Does anybody even ask?
No.
Right?
No.
This is a guy who supported a Muslim ban, you know, and you got to think that people will be reasonable enough to understand that this is not a bespoke election, that this is about a choice.
It goes back to the idea and the argument that people listening to this have to make to folks who are not totally satisfied. I'm not totally satisfied with Biden, no doubt about it. But the argument is that voting in a presidential election is public transportation. It's not about which place do you want to park right in front of if you have a car. It's about how do you get as close to the destination you're trying to get to as possible. You're taking a bus. Which bus stop makes it where you have to walk the least amount? And when you look at these two, you're inevitably, I think, going to reach the conclusion that while Biden doesn't get you to your destination, he gets you a whole heck of a lot closer than does Trump, who won't even pick you up. You know,
Yeah.
so I think that's the thing to keep in mind when making the case.
Well, okay, one for us. How's everything going down there?
Pretty good, man. You know, pretty good. Here's a little meaningless thing that is interesting. My wife really likes it when I shave my face. And I don't like doing it. And ever since I stopped being on TV commonly and doing that kind of thing, I just basically I shave like once or twice a week. And then I saw an ad for this like really easy, convenient little mirror that you can put in your shower that has a little hanger for your razor. And ever since then, every time I shower, it's so easy for me to shave, and I've been doing it. And I'll be honest, like, I mean, my wife and I, our marriage is a pretty substantial love affair anyway, but I feel like she's more in love with me lately because I'm shaving pretty much daily. And I feel like I can, stuff that might have started an argument before doesn't lately. And I got to say, I think it's because I'm shaving my face every single day. So pro tip to married men out
amazing.
there.
Amazing.
Yeah. What about you?
Oh, well, what's going on in my world? The Knicks run came to an end. It was really fun over the weekend. Everybody was like really into. I was in Fort Greene the day of the match, and it was just like really wild. But I would say the highlight of my week was our mutual friend Jamie Hodari has a daughter named Vivi, and I see her like a lot of mornings because I work out of a coffee shop. It's in the neighborhood next to mine, and I go over there so I could see him and her. We were doing the letters. I've never been a parent, right? So when I was a school principal, it was middle school. So we're like doing the letters. We're doing the sounds and all that. And we get to M, and I give her the M sound. And we got to this point where she just refused to acknowledge that M was the sound, like the sound was and she got really upset about it. Like she was pointing in my face and saying, "No, Ravi, it's not that."
How old is she?
And was like screaming at me in the coffee shop. Everybody's looking at me. How old is Vivi? Maybe 3 or 4? Yeah, okay. 3 maybe.
It's so funny when 3-year-old little girls are emphatic about anything. It's like adorable.
But I turned it around. By the end, she was sounding it out. And then I saw her the next day during the Knicks game, and she was like playing with chalk, and I was like doing like a little V for Vendetta, throwing M's on everything, which she didn't appreciate. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's a great child. Shout out to Vivi. Her grandmother listens to this podcast. Shout out to her grandma, who I know has been watching her this week. So,
Bella's 3.5, and when she feels strongly about something, it is the most adorable thing. And what she does lately, all they do is they mimic, because they just mimic what they see, and that's usually their parents. So, like, I have this exchange every couple of days where Bella will be like, "Daddy, I want ice cream," and I will explain what we're gonna eat first, and we're gonna do all these things, and then she will say, clearly got this from us. She will say, "Daddy, listen to my words." She'll say, "I want ice cream." "Daddy, you are not listening. Listen to my words, Daddy." And it is hilarious. So, and then of course I give in and she gets ice cream because I'm a very soft touch. She gets things that her older brother never did.
I could imagine. So. I don't even have to ask. I know who the tougher parent is.
Oh,
for sure.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even close.
No doubt, man. I'm so easy. I'm so easy. So, all right, folks. Thanks for listening. You can find both of us on social media. Ravi is at Ravi M. Gupta everywhere. I am at Jason Kander. Find the link to the Killing Justice series is that Ravi mentioned earlier and that we played the trailer for is in the show notes. So check that out. And please go subscribe and listen. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Meidas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.